What's happening, all you minties? Uncanny Omar here from Near Mint Condition, the home of collected editions. And join me today for my overview of the Who's Who Omnibus Volume 2 from DC Comics. Let's go ahead and get started. Alright, so let's go ahead and get started. We have here the Who's Who Omnibus Volume 2. And from the looks of just the front cover, it looks like we have different artists, like they did the first volume. And I'll look at the first volume with this one here in a second. Here's what the spine looks like. Who's Who Omnibus Volume 2, DC Comics logo, and then Superman this time around. And it was Batman the first time around. Yeah, so it looks like we have some Arthur Adams, Brian Boland, Jim Aparo artwork around the dust jacket. And speaking of dust jacket, underneath the dust jacket is just the images of those characters. Again, different artists. George Paez is Wonder Woman down there, but with new colors like they did the very first volume. As a matter of fact, actually, let's put the dust jacket back on. But before we do, here's what the flaps look like. There we go. There's nothing really written in them. It's just more of the artwork. Now, you may be wondering why the hell I put the dust jacket back on there. Well, that's to do this. Wanted to make a quick comparison to Volume 1, so here is what the front cover looks like of the dust jacket. Again, the same design for the logo right there of Who's Who, Omnibus Volume 1, of course. What the spines will look like together on your shelf. Batman, Volume 1, DC Comics down there, Who's Who Omnibus. Love it. Love when spines match like this, and they look wonderful on the shelf. As a matter of fact, it makes me wish that we had more of these so we could get a third volume. And then the back of the books back here. Now, each one of these retailing for $150. So they're very thick books. But let's shift the focus back to this dust jacketless. Is that a word? Sure it is. This dust jacketless omnibus. So we're going to crack this open, talk a little bit about this book and what makes it different than the first omnibus, what's included in here, the page count, and the build of the book. But before I go any further, I did want you to note this, because the very first volume also had these pages right there in yellow. I love it. It's like the yellow pages from the phone book. Anybody remember those days? Of course you do if you're watching this video. You're my age. You remember getting those phone books. The first volume had them all throughout, though. Like the entirety of the book was like that. This kicks off with something a little bit different and updated, which we'll talk about here in a second. Alright, let's go ahead and open this up. Alright, let's go ahead and crack this book open. Yes, I love this end page here. That's awesome. Got all kinds of characters. Firestorm, Flash, Who's Who, Omnibus Volume 2. And here are all the cover collection artists. Okay, so I was right. There was some Brian Boland, Arthur Adams, George Paez, and Jim Aparo. Mike Mignola, huh? Here is your introduction by Michael Urey, who was given the task of putting this book together, this 1989 update together. And he talks a little bit about the history behind it, the success of the first series, what he wanted to make a little bit different in the second series, which is really cool, which I'll talk about here in a little bit. And then his experience with it, and how there were a couple of flubs, especially when talking about Atlantis. So much so that he got a phone call from Mark Waid, talking about the location of Atlantis. But for this edition, everything has been corrected by the editors. And when I say corrected, I don't mean updated. So, for people that don't know much about the DC Universe, the DC Universe has been rehauled and rebooted a few times. The biggest time, of course, being in 1985's Crisis on Infinite Earths. And we got brand new origins, and some characters even changed. For example, the character of Wally West became the new Flash because something happened to Barry Allen. I know, not spoiling it, in the pages of Crisis on Infinite Earths. So this is all after Crisis. And the very first project they wanted to do was the Who's Who in the Legion of Superheroes. You have an introduction by Mark Waid, and this collects all 7 issues of that. All 7 issues of the Who's Who in the Legion of Superheroes. Talking about the villains, the heroes, the locations, the ships they use, the planets, the different races. So if you've ever wondered about Legion of Superheroes, this might be the best way to get introduced to those characters, at least getting to know a little bit of their background. But again, when talking about a book that was released in 1988, a lot of these things have been updated, and some of these things don't even matter anymore. A lot of the characters are still around in the Legion of Superheroes, but there are a lot of different origins and backgrounds nowadays. So one may ask, why in the world would you need something like this? Because it brings back a lot of memories. At least for me, it brought back a lot of memories towards the back half, or the 2/3 of this book. So what else is in here? Well, you have the Who's Who in the DC Universe 1 through 16, and Who's Who update number 1 through 2. That was the one that was released in 1993. So again, this is the stuff from the Legion of Superheroes. And sure, while some people may look at this and be like, hey, this is completely out of date, there's no use for this, but I feel like for something like Legion of Superheroes with so many characters, so much so that there's 7 freaking issues just dedicated to Legion of Superheroes, you can find out where these characters were back then in 1988, because they were around in 1968. So this was like a 30-year celebration of Legion of Superheroes, and there were a lot of people that were like, hey, we want to know more about these characters. And that's where this handbook came from. That's where the Who's Who Legion came from. Now, there was something here that they couldn't reprint, and that's the Who's Who Star Trek. It was a 2-issue series, but because of licensing, they could not reprint it as much as they wanted to. Alright, so this is all Legion of Superheroes again. The locations, the planets, the powers, the characters. This is all done in alphabetical order, by the way. Look at that cover. This is what I'm talking about. Look how many Legion of Superhero characters there are. It's insane. There's a comic within there, too. Now, and here we have Who's Who in the DC Universe, Volume 1. This is the stuff that they did in 1989, but it came out in 1990. And this is the updated stuff than what we got from Volume 1. So, in Volume 1, we had things coming out right after Crisis on Infinite Earths, and there were still some questions being asked. And then the update introduced us, like I said, to Wally West as the Flash. Here, we have things that are updated post-Crisis, and things were constantly changing. So, for example, Superman had already been given a new origin after John Byrne's Man of Steel. Batman had Year 1 under his belt, and then we had Wonder Woman by George Perez. So a lot of things were changing in the DC Universe. One of the biggest things, also the confusion of Hawkman. Now, what's really cool about this, and I remember when these came out, is that these issues originally came out, so all 16 issues of these Who's Who in the DC Universe, all came out in this loose leaf format. So they had 3 holes in them, so you could put them into a binder and make your own book, however you wanted it. If you wanted all the villains on one side, if you wanted all the heroes at the beginning, if you wanted all the locations together, that's how these books came out. And it was really cool. And the other thing I was going to say, memory serves me right, they were also bigger than your standard size comic books. They were like a magazine size. So they were a bigger trim size. And you can collect them and pull them out of the binding, so you could put them inside of a binder, of your own binder. And I think they had even DC binders available that you could put them in. Now, one thing you're going to take note of is that while the first issue is in alphabetical order, so, for example, we go from Darkseid to El Diablo, and we started off with Amanda Waller, what they wanted you to do is buy every single issue, of course they do, and here we go. So, for example, this is issue number 2, and we start with Booster Gold. So, the Omnibus itself is not in alphabetical order, and I don't know if this is going to bother some people or not. It doesn't bother me, because I like the way that this is collected. Those big editions I was talking about, the big oversized book, the single editions, single issues that were coming out, they were arranged so that you could get a couple of big names, so a couple of the big shots in there, like Superman and like one of the villains. So then you can pull them out and make it in your own alphabetical order if you wanted to. So those loose leaf editions were supposed to be separated from the spine and put into one of the binders. So those loose leaf editions were basically made so you could pull out the names or the characters you were interested in and put them into your DC binders. I think there were a couple of official DC binders. This edition, however, sticks to the format so that each of the issues are done in alphabetical order, so from A to Z. So, like we saw Amanda Waller, and it ends with Wotan. And then we started with Booster Gold in issue 2, and it ends with Starman. So that's the way this is done. I don't know if that's going to bother people or not, because, I mean, that's the way that they came out. So, you know, to me, it's not a big deal. There is an index all the way in the back that tells you exactly where you're going to find characters. But if you were familiar with the way that the first volume was done, everything was in alphabetical order. That's not what you're going to find here. What you're going to find here is just reprints of those loose leaf edition bundles, or issues rather. Hope I did an okay job explaining what's going on, but I'm pretty sure as I'm flipping through here, you can find out exactly what I'm talking about. Alright, so each one of the cards would come like this, and this was on the back, and then here you have what they're labeled. Villain, I think black bars were villains, supernaturals were purple, heroes were red, if I'm not mistaken, yeah. So here you find out their first appearances, their powers, the color of their eyes, everything you wanted to know. And what they were trying to do is cash in on the idea of trading cards, because trading cards were hot in the late 80s and early 90s. I know some of you that still collect Pokemon or the One Piece trading card game, probably looking at me or yelling at your phone or however you watch me, saying, hey, they're still popular. I'm sure they are, but back then it was insane. I think it was kind of like what drove the market, kind of like comics. Everybody thought they were going to get rich by buying trading cards. So they wanted to cash in on that popularity of those kind of cards and give you this loose leaf books that you go around and collect different issues. Marvel actually did the exact same thing with the handbook of the one that came out in '89. So I remember collecting these, and I remember collecting the Marvel books. The bios are all done by different creators. Usually if it was the writer on the book, they would come in and write a little bio, and if it was the artist working on the book, they would come in and draw the art. One very interesting thing also to note about this is, yes, we have all of this as Legion of Superheroes. Then everything else is, of course, the DC Universe. But a lot of the Legion of Superhero characters, a lot of the Legionnaires show up through here. But their entries are done by their names, not their alter egos. Whereas in the Legion of Superheroes, their entries are done by their alter egos. So I thought that was really cool, because this is, of course, during the 5 years arc when this was written. And Mark Waid writes a lot of the stuff in here. As a matter of fact, I just flipped to a page. One of my favorite entries, let me see if I can find it, is the entry of Death. I love this one. Neil Gaiman wrote it, and Mike Dringenberg drew it. But I love this entry. One day you'll meet her. You can find out for yourself. What the hell? So yes, this is also post-Vertigo, when DC started their Vertigo line because of Alan Moore's Swamp Thing, and then there's a lot of supernatural characters that show up through here, and there's an explanation as to who they are, in case kids or people weren't familiar with those type of characters. And if they couldn't get the artist that was currently working on books like Batman, Wonder Woman, Teen Titans, they would get one of the hot artists working in comics, and this is Arthur Adams. So you're going to find a lot of Arthur Adams in here. You're going to see some early Tim Sale, some Tom Lyle. You're going to see some George Padas in here, Jerry Ordway, of course, John Byrne, and Chris Sprouse, like some early Chris Sprouse. This is, of course, Eric Larson. So there's a lot of young guns that show up here. I believe this is Kerry Gamble, but that reminded me of like Tom Grumet, for example. But this is the kind of entries that you're going to find in here, the updated stuff. You're going to find obscure characters. I love Ambush Bug. I think there's 5 of us that still love that character and would love to see some kind of collection. You're going to see events collected in here, explaining the events. I believe this piece right here is Dusty Abel. Yeah. And this is written by Roger Stern, who was working on Superman at the time. So these were updated entries. Bart Sears. There's some wonderful Adam Hughes artwork in here of Fire and Ice. The hell was I saying? Got distracted. Yes, these are updated entries from the post-crisis era, but of course they've been outdated now. Early Travis Charest artwork, because he was working on Dark Stars at the time. There's even an Azrael one here and Raid, so there's a couple pictures by Joe Quesada. And man, it's another series that I really liked. Miniseries drawn by Joe Quesada. And I believe these are the binders all the way in the back. So these are the extras you get. These are the binders by George Pates and Brian Boland. And here's your character index. So if you, for example, if you're looking, I was just talking about Fire and Ice, so let's look for Fire. Fire's on page 282. So you can come back here and then go to page 282. Man, that was close. And there's that Adam Hughes picture that I was talking about. Because, of course, he was working on the Justice League International at the time. Or, no, he was on Europe. But, woo! Look at my girl right there. My goodness, Beatrice. Let's look at the ice. Because that was another good one. That one's on 390. Man, I'm getting good at these. And that's another Adam Hughes. That's adorable. Victoria. Alright. So, even further back past the index, we have the Dust Jacket art from Volume 1 and the Dust Jacket art from Volume 2. Very nice. And then the end paper here. Alright, let's take a look at the binding together. 1,216 pages. It is sewn binding, and that's what the eye looks like. But that, as they say, is that. If you're interested in purchasing this book, don't forget to check out our sponsor, cheapgraphicnovels.com, your online home for graphic novels and collected editions up to 50% off cover price. They have excellent shipping and prompt and helpful service. Check out their bargain deals for up to 90% off cover price. And don't forget that CGN also takes pre-orders. That way you don't miss out on the hottest releases. And they are currently running a special promotion for you Minties. If you're a first-time customer, after receiving your order confirmation email, reply back to that email and let them know near mint condition sent you their way. They will then apply a free shipping promotional credit to your next order in the US. Cheap Graphic Novels, your source for the hottest books with the kind of deep discount, quality shipping, and customer service that will keep you coming back for more. That was the content, the page count, and build of this omnibus. Let me know in the comments down below if you've picked up the first one, if you're picking this one up, if you have fond memories of collecting the loose leaf individual issues that you could put together and Frankenstein your own binder. But anyway, I would love to know all those comments down below. If you have any more questions, leave them down below. Don't forget to smash the like button, subscribe, and ring that bell for notifications to let you know when our videos are going live. We are on Spreadshop and Patreon, amazing ways to support the channel, and the description of the video has those links. Everyone, stay healthy and safe out there. Much love.